Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good evening, everyone. It is Sunday, May the 2nd, 2021. It is currently 5:49 p.m. Central Time, and I'm here at Victory Baptist Church, and I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. It's Sunday. It's 5:49 p.m. Central Time. That means you should be getting ready to go live for an in-person service. Well, I should be, but plans change. Things happen. We're not having an in-person service tonight. So what I had intended to do this evening was to stand behind the pulpit and lay out the grammatical historical method of biblical hermeneutics. That was the goal tonight, to really dig in and go with that. But everything changed. So that change didn't happen till very late. It was after 5 p.m. when that all came to its conclusion of what we were going to do tonight. So that left me here in the sanctuary from a little before 5, trying to figure out what to do. Sometime after 5, once I realized that the 6 o'clock in-person service wasn't going to happen. So then I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to go live and do what I was going to do at 6 o'clock tonight with that lesson, because that lesson is designed for everyone to be present, because we're working through the grammatical, historical, hermeneutical method, and I want everyone present so that they can ask questions. Okay, so that was designed for the in-person service. So, okay, now scratch that. What do I do? What do I do? And all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know what to do. And the whole thing has really, everything has gone on, because I got here this afternoon and the goal was to have at least 3 live broadcasts done before the 6 p.m. live service. So then that would be 4 live broadcasts on Sunday. Well, I've done 1. This is going to be number 2. So that means I did not accomplish what I set out to accomplish. And if you know anything about me, that means now I'm going to spend all night frustrated that everything fell completely apart. So now I have to somehow rescue this Sunday evening and try to present something that will benefit everyone. Now, some of you could care less about any of that. That's all behind the scenes stuff, and you don't care about what's going on behind the scenes. What you want me to do is produce a good program right now. Okay, you're right. That's what I need to do. But it's best for me. I like to be as transparent as I can. I don't like to just turn on the microphone and put on a performance. I would like to be real. Yeah, I need to get my mind in the right place, but I'm extremely frustrated because everything has gone wrong. And now I've got to try to convince myself that, okay, everything went wrong. And now I'm going to be I'm going to be spending all week trying to catch up. Okay, well, I was going to get 4 broadcasts done on Sunday afternoon. I didn't get that done. So now I got 2. So I'm 2 behind. So if I come here Monday, and my original plan was to do 4 I need to do 6 live broadcasts. And if I can't get 6 done on Monday, then that puts me, then I'm 4 behind on Tuesday. You see how it works? And then I'll be chasing and chasing and chasing and chasing and chasing. And no matter how much I chase, I can never catch up to the number that I wanted to get accomplished. Yeah, that's the reality. But with all of that said, I'm going to set all of that aside now. And I'm going to do an impromptu Bible study exercise. Now, the good thing is it's a Bible study exercise. Now, the way the Bible study exercises are designed, they were specifically designed for the members of Victory Baptist Church, where I'm like, okay, guys, here's the thing. And then they were supposed to then contact me going, okay, this is what I did. This is what I did. I had a question about this. That hasn't gone out. That hasn't proven to be very successful. But that's what they were originally designed for. I do part of the work, and then I hand it to everyone to go do the rest of the work, and then it's supposed to spark a discussion and a conversation so that we're then, engaging with one another about Scripture for the benefit of then, helping one another, encouraging one another, exhorting one another, because we're having that conversation. That hasn't really manifested itself the way I wanted to. But even though it hasn't manifested itself the way I want to, I still think the Bible study exercises are a great idea. I still think they're a great idea. And so I'm going to continue to do them because I know that there are people out there who are like, yeah, I love the Bible study exercises. Keep doing them. I'm benefiting from them. So even if it's only 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, and even if it may not be the way I originally planned it, I'm still going to do this because I think there are people out there hungry to study God's word, and they sometimes don't know where to start. And if I can turn on the microphone and lead them there, then that's wonderful. The good thing about doing an impromptu Bible study exercise is obviously I don't have to have everything figured out. I have to just kind of get you going in the right direction. Now, the problem with this one that we're going to do is because this one is problematic because we're about to open up our Bibles to a book and to a chapter that is extremely difficult. All right. Look, there's no way to pretend. I know people will act like, oh, no, it's very easy to understand. I think that's just ridiculous. It's very complicated to understand. And the reason I'm going to say it's complicated because there's such diverse differences of opinions and how you should interpret this and how you should deal with this. So I'm going to try to get you started. I had so many different ideas. So this is what we're going to do. I did not call this part 1, but I know that I don't want this to turn into a mini series. So I'm trying to not place part 1 so that I'm forced to do part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6, part 7, part 553. But depending on, again, reaction may determine what we do moving forward. We may come back and look at this from a lot of different perspectives. There's so much we can do. Now, the book in question is the book of Zechariah. All right? The book of Zechariah. If you've never read the book of Zechariah, studied the book of Zechariah, you know there is plenty here to work on. Like one of the things I could do, in fact, I'll just show you. If you pick up a Bible dictionary on the book of Zechariah, you will read this. And I could just give you this and stop and have you look this up. But let me this is just the very first paragraph in the Bible dictionary for its entry on Zechariah, book of. Zechariah, book of, an Old Testament prophetic book that portrays the coming glory of the Messiah. Many scholars describe Zechariah as the most messianic of all the Old Testament books because it contains 8 specific references to the Messiah in its 14 chapters. So some believe it's the most messianic book. Now, I find that humorous because you've got an entire school of hermeneutics that claims every verse, every chapter of the Old Testament points to Jesus. So how can it be the most messianic book of the Old Testament if every book, every chapter, and every verse points to Jesus? Then it wouldn't be, right? Because every book would be messianic. So right there already argues against certain methods of interpretation. But they say it's read it again. The most, not one of, but the most messianic of the Old Testament books because it contains 8 specific references to the Messiah. 8 specific references to the Messiah. Now, what I could do right here is just stop right now and say, okay, here is your homework. Start in Zechariah chapter 1. I do believe there's 14 chapters in Zechariah. I don't want to give you a wrong number. I'm just going with memory. Yes, Zechariah, 14 chapters. And 14 chapters, there are 8 specific references, right? Messianic references, as it states here. References to the Messiah, right? Specific ones. Now, what I could tell you to do is right now, start in Zechariah chapter 1, go to all the way through Zechariah chapter 14, and find those 8 specific references. And I would ask you to do something. Are there 8 specific references because the New Testament cites them as referring to Jesus? Or are they 8 specific references because people say they're about Jesus? Which is it? Is there New Testament support for that, or isn't there New Testament support? And I could leave that right. I could just place that before you. And everything is telling me that's what I should do, and I should just stop and end this broadcast right there. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to place that before you. And you really should work and do that at work. I don't know if anyone will. For those who will do the work, You know where to find me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Here's what you need to do. You need to identify the reference to the Messiah. You need to give me the chapter and the verse, and then you need to tell me if there is a cross-reference in the New Testament that supports your claim that it's a messianic reference, or if there is not a New Testament cross-reference, then justify why you think it's a messianic reference. All right? So you got to find all 8, then give me the chapter and the verse and Zechariah. Then give me a New Testament cross-reference that supports the claim that it's a messianic reference. And if there isn't a New Testament reference, offer your justification and why it is. Very simple. Well, I won't say simple, but doable, easily accomplish. You can easily accomplish it with a little bit of work and a little bit of time. So if anyone wants to do that this evening, let's do that. But here's what we're going to do. As I was sitting here, and all of my plans were falling apart, and I didn't know what to do, I just looked down, and I had my Bible study exercise for this quarter, or my Bible study exercise. Let me take that back. My Bible study guide that I use for my own Bible study exercises. All right. I had my Bible study guide for April through June 2021. All right. So it was just laying here on the table. I was moving books. I was thinking about just packing up and going home. Like, I don't know what to do. And when I moved one of the books, I saw that it said May the 2nd. Okay, wait. Oh, today's May the 2nd. All right. And it said this: Jerusalem, city of peace. All right, okay, that's interesting. Jerusalem, city of peace. And so I stopped for a second, because as soon as I read anything, I start trying to process it. I'm like, hey, Jerusalem, city of peace. Why is Jerusalem called the city of peace? Why? Has it been at peace? Has there ever been peace there? Okay, why does the Bible reference Jerusalem as the city of peace? Why? And what way is it the city? And I just started asking all kinds of questions, thinking, okay, that I could possibly do something with that, even if I don't do it here. If I go home, I can do that and just focus on doing something with the scriptures and try not to be too frustrated by everything else. Okay. So I just sat there, started thinking what to do. And then as soon as I got ready to maybe just go ahead and pack everything up, I looked over and I saw the reference. Zechariah chapter 12, verses 1 through 5. And immediately I was like, oh, Zechariah chapter 12. Zechariah chapter 12. That's a chapter. I'm like, wow, that's a chapter that brings all kinds of hermeneutical challenges to the forefront. Zechariah chapter 12 is one of those chapters you would throw out in a hermeneutics class and go, here you go, everyone, go to work. I'm going to go get lunch, supper, breakfast, lunch, supper, breakfast. I'll be back in about 6 weeks. And when I come back, y'all can't leave the classroom. When I come back, you're going to turn in your papers and show me what you did with Zechariah chapter 12. Correct interpretations get an A, wrong interpretations get an F, and you have to retake the class. I'll see you in 6 weeks, okay? And you can't leave, okay? You have to just sit here. There are IVs in the back of the classroom. You can just hook yourself up to an IV pole, but you can't leave, right? Because it would probably take that long to figure it out, because immediately you're going to realize there's going to be some disagreements on what to do with this chapter. So I thought for a Bible study exercise, I would bring our attention to Zechariah chapter 12. I could just give it to, hey, find those 8 messianic references in the book of Zechariah. That would be fun. Okay. Yeah, see, I'm getting ready to go in a different direction immediately. See, I want to go back to those 8 references. I really want to go back to those 8 references. Maybe we'll have to do a mini series on the 8 messianic references in the book of Zechariah. That could be fun. We'll see how many people actually find them. All right. So let's do this. Let's go to Zechariah chapter 12, and we're going to do a couple of things. All right. I got books. I got everything all over the place. All right. Let's do this. Let's just open up our Bibles to Zechariah chapter 12. Let's just start right there. Okay. Zechariah chapter 12. Let's start in verse 1. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 1. The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens, and layeth the foundations of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. All right, let's just stop in verse 1. Just right. Yeah, I don't want this to turn into a verse-by-verse exposition, but I'm going to have difficulty here. But I think verse 1 is so critical to the rest of this chapter because there's so many questions about this chapter, but let's start with verse 1, all right? So the burden of the word of the Lord for Israel. Stop right here. Now, this is the burden of the word of the Lord, this idea of a burden, a prophetic word, a word of judgment. Usually it's like a burden because it's the word of judgment. It's a word of the Lord, so it's a word that comes from God. And it's for Israel. It's for Israel. Now, immediately, question. Literal Israel or what some would claim, spiritual Israel? Now, remember, there are those in theology, and members of Victory Baptist Church know this because we spent forever debating this concept and trying to figure this out. There are some who say when you see Israel, it can refer to the nation of Israel, but it can refer to quote unquote spiritual Israel, which is made up of believers, basically the church, the invisible church. In other words, there's the nation of Israel, but then there's spiritual Israel, which is the church. Is this a word of judgment for the church? Well, we wouldn't think it's a word of judgment for the church, right? Right? Or is it, or isn't it? Right? So keep that in mind. So we have Israel. Saith the Lord. Now it says something about the one who speaks is the Lord, and the Lord who speaks is the one which stretcheth forth the heavens, layeth the foundations of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. The one pronouncing this burden, pronouncing this word of judgment, is the creator of heaven, earth, and man. All right. I think that's he stretched forth the heavens. There's the creator of the heavens. Layeth forth the foundations of the earth. There's the creator of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. God is the creator of the heavens, the earth, and human beings. All right. He's the one who has created those things. So why is that important? Well, the one who is creator is the one who obviously can pronounce judgment. The one who's creator is also the one who can say what is right and what is wrong and bring forth punishment. Right. I think we can all agree with that. Verse 2, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. Now, we've got Israel, we've got Jerusalem, and we've got Judah. Now, are those all literal? Literal Israel, literal Jerusalem, literal Judah? Very important question. If it's not literal and one represents spiritual Israel, one represents what do you start doing here? It just becomes very important to hermeneutics. Verse 3, and in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces through all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. In that day, saith the Lord, I will smite every horse with astonishment and his rider with madness, and I will open mine eyes upon the house of Judah and will smite every horse of the people with blindness. Now, is this a true judgment? Is this truly going to happen this way? Or is it allegorical? Is it figurative? What does it actually point to? What does it actually mean? Verse 5, and the governors of Judah shall say in their heart, if I can turn the page, the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be my strength, and the Lord of hosts their God. In that day will I make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, and like a torch of fire in a sheaf, and they shall devour all the people round about on the right hand and on the left, and Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. So there's judgment, burden. Now, I think I may have misspoke at the beginning and said judgment upon Jerusalem. He's going to make Jerusalem a cup of trembling, and make Jerusalem a burdensome stone. All right. So, but there's judgment here. This is a word of judgment. It's spoken of for Israel. All right. So who's being judged? There's a lot there to. So if I misspoke, I apologize. I'm trying my best not to completely teach this, but try to just lead you into the study itself. All right. So here we go. So in that day, he's going to make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire, among the wood, like a torch of fire in a sheaf. They shall devour all the people round about on the right hand and on the left, and Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. The Lord shall also save the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. In that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them in that day shall be as David, and as the house of David shall be as God, as the angel of the Lord before them. Now, when all these things he's going to be doing, clearly this is prophecy. Now, here's the question. Is this prophecy that was fulfilled at a certain point in history? Or is this a prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled? If it's a prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled, is it going to be fulfilled in a literal way, or is this going to be fulfilled in some figurative way, and it has nothing to do with Judah and nothing to do with Israel, has everything to do with the church? Right? These are important questions. Verse 9, and it shall come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in the bitterness for his firstborn. Now, at some point, something's going to happen, it seems, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, that they're going to look upon the one whom they have pierced. If that's a reference to Jesus, well, then clearly this hasn't happened, because first, it couldn't have happened before Jesus was crucified. It would have to happen after Jesus was crucified, and we have no example of this happening after Jesus was crucified, right? Do we? No, you had many of those within Jerusalem who were persecuting Christians. And those were Jews who were persecuting believers. In that day shall there be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon and the valley of Megiddo. So in that day there should be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of Hadad Rimmon and the valley of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn every family apart, the family of the house of David apart and their wives apart, the family of the house of Nathan apart and their wives apart, the family of the house of Levi apart and their wives apart, the family of Shimei apart and their wives apart, all the families that remain, every family apart and their wives apart. Wow, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot going on. And you've got to figure out what's happening here. Now, here's what I want to do. Instead of trying to give you all the answers, I'm going to do a little bit of reading from two different sources, okay? In front of me, and now this is free, it's online. That's why I want you to look this up. I want you to look up the Matthew Henry complete commentary, not the concise one, the complete commentary by Matthew Henry. And I would want you just to sit down and start reading his commentary. And for some reason, I'm thinking I said the wrong book. Zechariah chapter 12. Yeah, Matthew Henry. I think my mind was telling me I said Matthew chapter 12. Matthew Henry commentary, the complete commentary, not the concise one. Make sure you get Matthew Henry complete and start reading his commentary on Zechariah chapter 12. Because it's a very famous commentary in church history, and I want you to see how he approaches the text. Now, we're going to read from it in just a minute, but in the meantime, I want to just start with the Bible study guide that I have here. I just want you to see some things that they do here, all right? Here we go. Jerusalem is the most frequent mentioned city in Scripture. There are some 800 references are made from Genesis to Revelation to Jerusalem. Sometimes it is denoted as Zion. That's a lot of references. Over 800 references. Right? It's the most frequently mentioned city in the entire Bible. Now, how do we interpret Jerusalem? Do we interpret Jerusalem as a literal city, or do we interpret it as a figurative city, a spiritual city? Or do we refer to Jerusalem, or wait for it, as the church? These are important questions, right? Because people's entire eschatology comes down to how they handle some of these questions. They say Jerusalem literally means city of peace. The phrase conveys the absence of violence. It signifies a place of serenity, rest, safety, and security. Yet Jerusalem has been anything but peaceful historically and present, and even in the present. And that's true. Historically, it's not been a place of peace. Even in the present, it's not a place of peace. So that's interesting that its name doesn't ever seem to convey the reality that people are currently experiencing. All right, is there something significant there? Let's continue. Yet Jerusalem, okay, so it's been anything but peaceful historically or even in the present. It remains one of the most turbulent, volatile cities in the world, militarily, politically, and religiously. God declares that during the final, this is giving you an interpretation here. God declares that during the final 3.5 years of the tribulation, he will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling as well as a burdensome stone. And he's going to do this. It's going to be a cup of trembling and a burdensome stone to all the nations gathered against her. Now, the interpretive part there is saying that this is going to happen in the final 3.5 years of the tribulation. Let's ignore that for now. The text does seem to clearly indicate that God is going to make Jerusalem a cup of trembling as well as a burdensome stone to all those who are gathered against her. That seems to be accurate from the text. Such descriptions do not depict the city at peace and rest. Rather, they fit well the words of Jesus over 500 years later when he declared that the city was destined to be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Luke chapter 21, verse 24. Though the Jewish people may dwell in the land God designated as theirs, even largely controlling that territory, including its principal city, it will continue to be a troubled spot, not only for them, but the entire world as it continues its opposition to God and its purposes. The Gentile powers that be continue seeking to lord over both the land and the Jewish people. All right. Now, this is very important. That Jerusalem is of so much concern is puzzling to many except those who interpret Scripture literally. Now they're making an argument that for many, the fact that the Bible mentions Jerusalem over and over and over and over is somewhat puzzling to them, but it's not supposedly puzzling to those who interpret the Bible literally. Now, so I will argue those who don't interpret it literal will say it's not puzzling because they just make Jerusalem into something else and then explain away the meanings of the text. So I don't know. Is it puzzling? To which side is it puzzling? I think every side seeks to explain why Jerusalem is mentioned so many times. It says, God's written revelation specifies a timetable to establish his kingdom on the earth, outlined in Daniel 9, 24 through 27, and detailed by John in Revelation chapter 6 through 20. Some 600 years later, when the kingdom begins, Jerusalem will be the city of peace. So they're arguing Jerusalem will never be the city of peace until a literal kingdom is literally set up in a literal Jerusalem, and that kingdom will last for 1,000 years literally. Then and only then will Jerusalem be the city of peace. Until then, it's going to be volatile, conflict, chaos, and all of the things that we currently see. But they're like, the only way to understand it is to interpret the Scriptures in a literal way. Now, is that accurate? Not accurate. Now, let's set this aside. Let's grab Matthew Henry, all right? Now, there's more entries here. There's more information here in my Bible study guide on Zechariah 12, but I'm trying to bring you to this conflicting approach. Here's Matthew Henry. Zechariah chapter 12. The apostle, and he has in parentheses Galatians 4 and Galatians 4:25 through 26. So when he says the apostle, I'm assuming the Apostle Paul, distinguishes, now listen carefully, the Apostle Paul distinguishes between Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children, the remaining carcass of the Jewish church that rejected Christ, and Jerusalem that is from above, that is free and is the mother of us all, the Christian church, the spiritual Jerusalem, which God has chosen to put his name there. Now stop right there. So Matthew Henry argues, okay, when we go to Zechariah chapter 12 and we see this Jerusalem, what we have to realize is that the Apostle Paul distinguishes between Jerusalem, which now is, I'm assuming the city, which and is in bondage with her children, the remaining carcass of the Jewish church that rejected Christ, and the Jerusalem that is from above, that is free and is the mother of us all, the Christian church, the spiritual Jerusalem. So Matthew Henry says, now when you think of Jerusalem, there's the one that is, right? That's the one in bondage. It's the carcass of the Jewish church. And you've always got to contrast that with a different Jerusalem, which is, in his words, it is above, it is free, it's the mother of us all. It is the Christian church, the spiritual Jerusalem, which God has chosen to put his name there. Now, that's a lot of claim. Now, that's a lot to claim. Now, his justification is Galatians 4:25 through 26. So let's just take a look at it. Galatians 4:25 through 26. Galatians 4:25 through 26. All right. Now, here is what he's doing. He says, for this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. Now, if you don't know what's going on in Galatians 4, Paul is using the story of Hagar and Sarah to draw kind of an illustration, to draw we'll even go so far to say a type, and he's drawing a contrast here. So, in fact, let's go back so that it will all make sense. Galatians 4:22, for it is written that Abram had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he of the free woman was by promise. Which things are an allegory, for these are the two covenants. The one from Mount Sinai, which engendereth to bondage, which is Agar, as says in the King James, or Hagar. For this is Agar, is Mount Sinai and Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, rejoice, thou barren, thou bearest not, break forth and cry, thou that travailest not, for the desolate hath many more children, than she which hath an husband. All right, now, so it's drawing this correlation. Now, his argument is, okay, that sets up two Jerusalems. One is the one that's the physical Jerusalem, and one is a Jerusalem which is above, which is the mother of us all, which he identifies as being the church. Now, there's a lot going on here, okay? A lot going on here. Let's see now what he does. So that he starts Zechariah 12, his commentary, with making that assertion. Now, he's taking from Galatians and reading it back into Zechariah. Now, is that the right way to do this? Because we know that Zechariah 12, it's a word, a word of the Lord, a burden, right, to Israel. Zechariah 12:1 makes that very clear. So is Zechariah a word to Israel to tell them about a heavenly Jerusalem, which is the church? Is that what is trying to be done here? You're making a lot of assumptions. Let's see what he goes on to do here. All right. He says, in the foregoing chapter, we read the doom of the former. All right. And the former would be the Jerusalem which now is. and left that carcass to be a prey for the eagles that should be gathered to it. Now in this chapter, we have the blessings of the latter, many precious promises made to the gospel Jerusalem. So according to Matthew Henry, when we read about the destruction of Jerusalem, that's the physical city. That's the physical city. But when we read about the blessings of Jerusalem, that's the heavenly Jerusalem. That's the gospel Jerusalem. So judgment goes to physical Israel. Blessing goes to spiritual Israel. Now, please note, this is why we have so many differences in eschatology. Because how do you make this hermeneutic work? All right. So let's see how he follows this. All right. So now we're going to have the precious promises made to the gospel Jerusalem by him who declares his power to make them good. It is promised that the attempts of the church's enemies against her shall be to their own ruin. Now, please note. So now what we're going to learn here is that when the enemies come against the church, they're going to be destroyed, because now Jerusalem and Zechariah 12 just magically became the church. And the scriptural justification is Galatians 4. Wow, that there you see how this works? Now, would anyone who read Zechariah understood it that way? Or would they have understood that he was referring to an actual Jerusalem and an actual Israel? But these are important questions. All right, now let's continue. So he declares his power to them that make it good. That the attempts, so this is what he's trying to argue. It is promised. He's saying this is what is promised here. Number one, that the attempts of the church's enemies against her shall be to their own ruin, and they shall find that it is at their peril if they do her any hurt. Number two, that the endeavors of the church's friends and patrons for her good shall be pious, regular, and successful. Number three, that God will protect and strengthen the meanest and weakest that belong to his church and work salvation for them. Number four, that is preparative for all his mercy. As a pledge of it, he will pour upon them a spirit of prayer and repentance, the effect of which should be universal and very particular. These promises were of use to them, to the pious Jews that lived in troubled times under Antiochus and other persecutors and oppressors, as they are still to be improved in every age for the directing of our prayers and encouraging of our hopes with reference to the gospel church. So in other words, all of these promises are to the church. This is to the church, not to Israel. This is not about God in fact, go back to Zechariah 12. Back to Zechariah chapter 12. He is arguing that when it says, in that day shall the Lord defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, he's not defending the inhabitants of physical Jerusalem. He will be inhabiting the defendants of the gospel Jerusalem, the church. And when he says, I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication, they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son. Now, that one finds somewhat curious, because wait a minute, he's going to pour upon those who are already in the church so that they will see the one whom they've pierced? Don't we have to look on the one whom we have pierced by our sins in order to become saved before we enter the church? I don't know. I'm going a lot of different directions here. All right. Let's see here. Where else do I want to go? I'm going to try to find, let's see, what verse is that? That's 12:10. Let me see if I can find here. If I can find his commentary on this particular section. See here, I'm looking. It says, okay, here's, I'm skipping around here just because because trying to read all of this would take hours to try to break it all down because it's so. But the reason I want you to do this, and I really want you to read the Matthew Henry on this chapter because this is such a popular commentary. One of the reasons it's so popular, it's free online. And so almost any Bible study tool that you ever purchase, if they want to place extra content, they're going to give you Matthew Henry because it's just kind of like, I don't think anyone actually owns the rights to it. So it's just everywhere. So people will reference this. And I went to an independent fundamental Baptist church that completely rejected Matthew Henry's eschatology, but they recommended get a good Matthew Henry commentary. Well, why? It goes against everything you teach because you're a dispensationalist who believes completely different than this. Why would you recommend Matthew Henry? A lot of times I think people recommend commentaries that they never actually read. So that drives me crazy. But you should read this. Just read Matthew Henry on Zechariah 12, right? But let's jump down here. The day here spoken is of the day of Jerusalem's defense and deliverance, that glorious day when God will appear for the salvation of his people, which, if it do refer to the successes which the Jews had against their enemies, and the time of the Maccabees, yet certainly, all right, here we go. He writes this very weird. If it do refer, that's literally how it here in this version. If it do refer to the successes which the Jews had against their enemies in the time of the Maccabees, yet certainly looks further to the gospel day of Christ's victories over the power of darkness and the great salvation he has wrought for his chosen. Now stop right here. So on one hand, he tries to say that there's a possible historical fulfillment where we find that this refers to the successes the Jews had against their enemies in the time of the Maccabees. I don't know how you can read Zechariah 12 and say that this refers to what happened during the time of the Maccabees. I don't know how you get there. But he says that this looks to the gospel day of Christ's victories over power of darkness. And this refers to the glorious work or the salvation he wrought for his chosen. All right. Now we have here an account of two remarkable works designed in that day. A glorious work of God to be wrought for his people. I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. Nations against Jerusalem many and mighty nations, but they shall be destroyed. Their power shall be broken, and their attempts baffled. The mischief they intend shall return upon their own head. God will seek to destroy them, not as if he were at a loss for ways, and brings it to about. Infinite wisdom was never So in other words, he's going to find different ways to do this, but his seeking to do it, that it is very earnest and intent upon it. He is zealous for Zion with great jealousy and has the day of vengeance in his heart, and that he overrules means and instruments and all the motions and operations of second causes in order to do it. All right. So saying that he's going to destroy all of those who come against Jerusalem. I'm skipping a lot of things that is stated here. I know I'm jumping around because I'm not trying to read every word. I'm just trying to get the basic idea here. All right. It says, now look at what he's doing here. In Christ's first coming, he sought to destroy him that had the power of death and did destroy him, bruised the serpent's head, and broke all the powers of darkness that fought against God's kingdom among men and against the faithful friends and subjects of that kingdom. He spoiled them. He made a show of them openly. And his second coming, he will complete their destruction when he shall put down all opposing rule, principality, and power, and death itself shall be swallowed up in victory. The last enemy shall be destroyed of all that fought against Jerusalem. Now, he's spiritualizing this. In other words, this is not him fighting against the actual enemies against the physical Jerusalem. This is fighting against the spiritual enemies of spiritual Jerusalem, the church. So this has nothing to do. So this has nothing to do with physical Jerusalem or physical Israel. That's what he's basically getting at. All right. Then he continues here. A glorious work of God to be wrought in his people, in order to the work that is to be wrought for them when he seeks to destroy their enemies, he will pour upon them the spirit of grace and supplication. When God intends great mercy for his people, the first thing he does is to set them a praying, Thus he seeks to destroy their enemies by stirring them up to seek to him that he would do it for them. Because though he has proposed it and promised it, it is for his own glory to do it. Yet will for this be inquired of by the house of Israel. Ask and it shall be given. And he goes on to say, well, you can go ahead and read the rest. All right. There's a lot there to try to unpack. I apologize that gets very wordy and written very, at times, it's very frustrating with Matthew Henry because he just won't come out sometimes and just say what he means. You have to really try to read between the lines. And what he is saying here is like, hey, this is all this wonderful work that's going to be done, but it's removed from any historical context for a physical Israel or a physical Jerusalem, and it all becomes about the church. But is that what is meant here? What is actually meant here? Now, he uses Galatians 4. So here is your task. Does Galatians 4, 25 and 26 offer a hermeneutical principle that should be imposed upon Zechariah chapter 12 to change how we interpret Zechariah chapter 12? That's number one. Does Galatians 4, 25 through 26 offer a hermeneutical principle that should be applied to Zechariah chapter 12? So because what you have to do is Israel really isn't Israel there. Jerusalem isn't really Jerusalem there. And you impose the church and you impose a whole gospel Christian church approach to it. In other words, Israel gets the punishment. Now, Matthew Henry even said Israel gets the punishment, but all of that blessing, that's for the church, not for physical Israel. That's for the church. Now, that's super nice of you to be so kind to Israel that way. Hey, you get punished, but we get the blessing. I gotta love that. All right. So, at number one, because the best he's offered is Galatians 4, 25 through 26. Is that a clue? All right. Number two. Here's your second task. Is Zechariah 12 quoted anywhere in the New Testament? If so, how? What is quoted? What parts of Zechariah 12 is quoted in the New Testament, and how are they quoted? Right. So number one is Galatians 4, 25 through 26, a principle that should be read back into Zechariah 12. Number two, how can I state this? Where in the New Testament is Zechariah 12 referenced or quoted directly from, and what is being said about it? That's number two. And number three, what do you think a normal, literal interpretation of Zechariah 12, where does that lead you? Right? There's your three tasks. Number one, does Galatians 4, 25 through 26 offer an interpretive principle that should be placed on Zechariah 12? And if it's applied to Zechariah 12, you would have to apply it to every Old Testament passage that mentions Jerusalem. All right? Where would that logically lead you? All right? That's number one. Number two, where in the New Testament is Zechariah 12 referenced? Find the New Testament references and what is said about it. And number three, very important, what would a literal reading of Zechariah 12, where would it lead you to? What conclusion would it lead? Now, there's so much of Zechariah 12, you may not understand what's going on, but just look at it and go, okay, this seems to be what it's saying. Where would it lead you? Now, I don't think you're going to find a historical fulfillment for it. So you either have to have a spiritual fulfillment or a literal fulfillment. Where do you think a literal reading would lead you to? I'll stop right there. I apologize because once I started reading that Matthew Henry commentary, I made the mistake to continue reading it. I made the mistake because I was trying to get down. I started kind of just jumping around words and skipping words. And I really, now I'm very frustrated. Because I was trying to get further down here and I'm looking at it. There's a lot there. And I apologize. I should have stopped reading I should have stopped early on, but I kept reading because I wanted to just get more examples of what he does here. But it's not super long. I just want you to sit down and just read Zechariah 12 commentary from Matthew Henry. Just read it slowly, not like I did. I know I was jumping over words because I was trying to get somewhere, and then I realized I was never going to get there. I was just never going to get there. It was going to take too long. So please read it for yourself. Read it for yourself. All right. So I guess your assignment would actually be read first the commentary from Zechariah 12 by Matthew Henry. And I wanted to get back to the Bible study guide. Didn't even get to half to what I wanted to do. But then ask yourself, is Galatians 4:25 and 26 a hermeneutical principle that should be applied to Galatians or to Zechariah? Where in the New Testament is Zechariah 12 referenced and quoted from? And 3, what would a normal literal reading of Zechariah 12, where would it lead you to? What conclusions could you come to? Even if you can't understand everything in the chapter, what are some basic conclusions you can come to? That'll be a good exercise. All right, I'm going to stop right there. Thank you for tuning in. I hope that was beneficial. I don't know. I'm just going to stop right there, all right? Because anything else I say will only make it worse, all right? So hopefully something I did today would be accomplish something. If it did, let me know. If it didn't, you can let me know that as well. But have a good week. Have a good evening. God bless.